Disclaimer, this was a really long one. Naturally covering two people with intertwined stories is not easy. I also want you all to understand that I'm not an Ada and Emil expert, especially compared to those out there who have been with the couple since the beginning. I only got here last year, so forgive me if I overlooked something or made a mistake. Thanks, and on to the video. Due to the news that Game Zero is coming and with Hertz Tears trailer dropping, I finally decided it was time to make a post I wrote back in May into a video looking into the lore of Ada and Emil. The fact that Emil is getting a hunter identity inspired me in part to make this video, as I knew a lot of people were expecting the identity switch to be Helena, who was labeled as the only Punisher in the group, or Galatea, which they did confirm in July's Dev Q&A that she will receive a switch. Yet, Hunter Emil isn't that surprising either. Another reason I wanted to make this post is because this is a long time coming actually. When I first got into Identity 5 last year, I watched a stream of someone making a Rife tier list, and when they got to Ada, they instantly berated her. They showed an intense dislike over knowing Ada was in a doctor-patient relationship which she could easily take advantage of towards her own selfish desires. This always stuck with me because I felt there must be more to the story. This was also coming from a streamer who only had a surface level understanding of the game's lore and Ada herself. So then, the questions stand as these. 1. Is Ada as awful as she sounds? And 2. Does Emil make sense as a hunter? Short answer, it's complicated, and yes, quite so. Before we get into the thick of it, let's have a quick rundown of their backstories, starting with Ada. Ada Mesmer grew up accompanying her father, a well-renowned and respected psychiatrist in his studies and work, before becoming an assistant professor of psychology herself. She would go on to be accepted into a laboratory for her work in psychology, which was centered on hypnotism. Ada grew fascinated with the subject and became obsessed with proving her research and experience could help patients who were in pain. She hoped that through hypnotherapy, she could use subliminal suggestions to try and eliminate patients' pain or negative emotions. Yet, her research fell through because none of the patients she experimented on would be receptive to the hypnosis because they were in too much pain. Feeling ever-increasing pressure against those who continued to look down on her, including her own father who disapproves of her research, Ada decided to take on an 11-day training program at the infamous Right Sand Street Asylum. She hoped that would help her find the perfect experimental subject, and she did. She found Emil. Now, not much is known about Emil's past to those around him. Luckily, us as players have his backstory to fall back on. Emil was the one of 4 children born into a very poor and dysfunctional family. His mother was prone to having attacks herself and would break the dishes before having to be restrained to the bed to protect others and herself from harm. When the family became too poor to continue taking care of the children, Emil was given to a man who owned an underground dogfighting ring. At first, Emil would be forced to beg out on the streets for money and was often berated for not bringing enough money back home. Eventually, however, Emil ended up wandering into the dogfighting ring one day. He got out alive, but with some injuries. Unfortunately, due to the aroused audience who enjoyed such a display of a boy versus dog, Emil's new guardian decided to bank on that and force the boy into the ring with the dogs. From that point onwards, Emil was treated more like a dog than an actual human being. He was fitted with a collar, confined to a kennel, and shackled inside it with nothing to eat but unidentified mush. Due to this, his mental health rapidly deteriorated. His emotions became stunted as he had little human contact, and his behavior started to resemble the same dogs he was forced to contend with in the ring. Somehow, Emil would escape from the dogfighting ring and would make his way to Right Sand Street Asylum, where he was found by the staff to be suffering from a high fever. He was forcibly admitted into the asylum where he recovered from his fever, but ended up with amnesia. He was a blank slate and could hardly remember the days of being a dog in the ring, though those memories still remained buried deep within him. At the asylum, his treatment wasn't much different from the dogfighting ring, unfortunately, if not worse. He was still placed in solitary confinement called cages for the most dangerous patients. He was subjected to terrible electroshock therapy and given sedatives that made him unable to resist to provide treatment. It also horribly messed up his nervous system and caused him to be more in a state where he drifted in and out of consciousness, hardly aware if he was truly alive or not. It wasn't until Ada arrived and took over his treatment that Emil would soon find some comfort in being treated by a gentler doctor, who seemed to genuinely care for him. The feelings the two of them had for each other would grow in those 10 days, and cause them to escape the asylum together and journey far away to live contentedly with each other. Emil's condition stabilized, and even improved in the next 3 years, until it suddenly deteriorated and reverted Emil back to how he was when he first met Ada. At her wit's end, Ada decided it was time to swallow her pride and take up the offer of an old acquaintance who had promised a cure for Emil. It was time to go to paradise to find themselves. Now, that was the condensed backstory of Ada and Emil, but naturally there are details we should more or less look into to explore this twisted relationship to decide if truly Ada is a terrible person, Emil feels right as a hunter, and if this relationship is actually represented right. Now, I'm going to discuss the 10-Day Memories event, aka the Chishi Festival 2021, and this is basically the bulk of this video. FYI. So this event came out in August of 2021, at the same time Emil and Ada dropped as characters in the game. The 10-Day Memories event was to serve as an introduction to these characters, and provide us with a little more backstory on the days they met, along with the build-up to their escape from the asylum. I would highly suggest reading it yourself, as I won't mention everything I went over because that would obviously be a lot for an already long video. However, I want to share my thoughts and what I learned from the event. 1. Ada is a very morally great character, and while I do believe you can freely disagree with how she did things, her love for Emil is sincere and true. Twisted, yes. Was her treatment of Emil at right stand morally misguided? Quite so. Should she be demonized for what she did to him? Personally, I think not. 2. I noticed that Emil is babied a bit. Okay, maybe not just a bit. In the community, and I understand why, but he's still a grown man who, once he has moments of clarity, understands what he's going through and what he wants. 3. Understandably, you can argue that his drug-riddled mind and awful treatments causes him not to make the best judgments, but I personally didn't always feel that way about him when reading his thoughts. This will also relate to Ada's morally great issue as well, as you will see. And lastly, their relationship is more than a simple reading of doctor-patient falling in love. Their relationship is terribly dependent on the other, and is by no means a healthy relationship, but both consented and knew what they signed up for. These points were a bit longer than I wanted, but let me explain them a bit further along with what I found to provide more context. So the story here is that Detective Orpheus is wandering through the manor and finds some items connected to Ada and Emil. One is a patient record, and the other is an old trunk, which are connected to Emil and Ada respectively. You can choose one to explore whichever character you choose, and as Emil or Ada, you will make choices throughout the story based on reason or emotion. That determines your final deduction tied to how Orpheus sees Ada and Emil and their relationship with each other. First, let's take a look at the patient record, which tells Emil's side of the story. Now, I won't go into everything as I said before, but I think reading his record is pertinent in learning about the type of person Emil is and helps us understand how we should judge Ada in connection to him. Firstly though, I want to say that another thing I saw some people sort of complain about when Heard Steer, aka Hunter Emil, was announced is that they saw others wonder how someone like Emil could be a hunter who appears very violent and aggressive. So, is Emil dangerous and violent? Mind you, I made this before the trailer came out, but it's still an important point to look into. So, looking at one of the first things you read in the event, we have important answer. Diagnosis: Emil suffers from amnesia, manic fits, and severe aggressive tendencies. To be honest, it seems obvious to me that Emil can be aggressive despite looking like a naive and innocent cherub here. Actually, his original design notes mentioned they purposely made him to look like that. And I think it worked wonderfully, if not backfired a little bit, considering some appeared to be a bit too overly protective of Emil. In addition, there's Emil's 2023 letter where Ada describes an incident on Christmas where Emil began to have terrible headaches again, which led him to experience spasms. She also mentions he didn't even recognize her throughout this fit. While he didn't attack her here, it's important that we realize he can be unpredictable in this state. Another small instance of Emil acting out was described in the 10 Days Memory event when on the third day of Ada's visit, she goes to see Emil in his cage and saw him suffering an intense headache. She tries to treat him herself, but she couldn't, as, and I quote, "He bared his teeth at me, trembling and gasping violently. He didn't seem to be fully conscious." Ada felt a bit threatened by him, and perhaps trying her best to soothe him and to call for help, she then proceeded to blow her whistle and realized to her surprise it calmed him. This was the moment that Ada realized that her whistle could be used to treat Emil. But all of that is to say that Emil can certainly be dangerous, if not mentally unstable, even towards those close to him. With that being said, there has been no concrete evidence he has hurt Ada directly though. And with the recent drop of Heard Steer's trailer, I do feel all doubt is erased on Emil's violent tendencies. Another thing that piqued my interest with Emil in this is how he does appear cautious and wary while thinking things through with the thoughtfulness I didn't ascribe to him at first. He isn't mindless nor blindly accepting of his treatment, his situation, or even Ada, initially at least, either. Some quotes of his from the event that caught my attention are as followed. "I'm so tired all the time. It's that medicine they give me. Sometimes it's a pill, sometimes it's a nasty liquid. But it always makes me float away into the sky where countless pairs of eyes are always staring at me." For context, this is Emil recollecting where he is and what's happening to him at the asylum. Another quote. "The doctor strapped me into a chair with no way out. It felt like a million needles were stabbing into me from head to toe. I tried to get out of this chair, but the restraints were too tight. Stop, please doctor, can someone please stop it?" Context, Emil is being administered electric shock therapy. Another quote. "Wait, Ada, does this mean she woke me up? What is she planning? Does she really just want me to wake up?" For context, this is Emil's reaction to Ada admitting she lowered his dosage to wake him up, but in turn that causes him to feel more pain in his treatments. More on that later. Another quote. "Is this a gift? What do people normally do when they receive one? Should I be polite and thank her for being so kind to an insane person like me? And then, should I give her something in return?" This is when Ada had gifted him a flower after he chooses her over medicine. And the last quote. "It's a lousy gift from a lunatic. I should just give it to her as quietly as possible while," and he cuts off here. For context, Emil after he has fashioned a ring for her from his bedwires. So hearing Emil through his own words and thoughts was really nice, especially since we don't get to see that often, especially in the context of the OG lore. Even in some events, or even the yearly anniversary messages, Ada usually speaks for Emil. His letters are also typically written by Ada. Though this event also gives us some of Emil's written words in the form of a diary he kept after their escape. While they lived alone together at their new home, Emil describes their day-to-day life in his personal diary. While the first entry in May is marked by spelling and grammar errors, his October entry shows great improvement and growth. After reading Emil's words, I felt as if some in the community see him as having the mind of a child, when in fact, he's just a grown man who grew up in horrible circumstances. I even felt a sharp pang of sympathy when he called himself a lunatic and felt upset for him. Another thing I'm suddenly reminded of is how he's described in his experimental file as being indifferent and emotionally blank, which paints a sort of bleak picture of Emil. Clearly, I disagree with that, even if in part there's some truth in it. Calling him indifferent makes him sound too apathetic, and calling him emotionally blank strips him of his humanity. He may as well be a robot programmed by Ada to be the perfect lover, but he's not. Emil is fully aware of himself and what he is and what he chooses to do, when it is in his ability to do so. But there's something about being fully aware that you're mentally unwell, but knowing full well you can hardly do anything about it that gets to me. You still want to live a normal life, and even better, you find someone you want to share that life with. This someone is the only relief and sweetness your awful life has given you, and not only that, she can help cure you, or at least you thought she could, and perhaps a part of you still believed that to the very end. Yet life truly is never so gracious, especially for IDV characters. But speaking of Ada, her side of the story gives us more insight to her character and her thoughts on what she does and why she helped Emil. Initially, yes, she did view Emil as a fascinating subject. During her first electroshock therapy session she attended with Emil, she knows how he accepted the treatment without much fuss, and even smiled at the doctors afterwards, stating he gave the doctors a mindless yet eerily natural smile, and described Emil as a friendly puppy and a tiny lab mouse all at once. How aptly named was the cage then for a pitiful creature like him, when she saw he seemed to enjoy the treatment. Granted, her words can be seen as belittling to some, and that's understandable, because I was also sitting here thinking Ada truly saw him as an experimental subject first and a person second. Yet, I will give her credit, because the scorn she had towards the doctors of Right Stand with her statement of how there were more untrained doctors than unhinged patients at the asylum was pretty apt, and garnered some brownie points towards her from me. Putting that aside for now, let's get to the heart of her side of the story and what I feel needs to be discussed. We know that Ada eventually takes over Emil's treatment, and through this, she is able to reduce the amount of dosage he receives when being medicated. While this helps provide him with more lucidity in his life, it also increases the amount of pain he feels in his treatments. Ada does feel guilty about this, and understands she's no better than those other doctors doing this to Emil. For a little more context, in the story, after he starts receiving these reduced dosages, Ada attends one of Emil's electroshock therapy sessions. She can choose to simply observe the session and then use her whistle to calm him, or she can start the experiment during his treatment by increasing the intensity of the electricity he receives. This is the player's choice, but still understandable if you're feeling any sort of disapproval or discomfort towards Ada upon hearing this. Regardless, the day after that session, Ada decides to confess to me what she has done. Not before thinking it over and knowing full well she was tormenting him and feeling conflicted about it. But here another choice springs up where Ada is torn between trying to console him so he would forgive her, or allow him to hate her for hurting him. Again, this is the player's choice. Still, a part of Ada feels justified in what she was doing, but still worried about what Emil would choose. Confesses to him then, and lets him decide between her and the medicine. Emil naturally chooses Ada, which fills her with elation and justification in the belief that what she was doing was right. After all, pain and treatment are two sides of the same coin, as she said at the time. I may be giving her too much credit, but I do believe if Emil had chosen medicine, I feel Ada wouldn't have increased the dosage again. She didn't have to ask him, nor did she even have to tell him what she was doing. Emil didn't have the power to do anything in regards to resisting treatment, and even if he noticed a difference, which he did, would he really have gone to one of the doctors to tell them? Not to mention, but Emil seemed happier being able to be lucid and awake than staying trapped in the fog between being nothing more than a corpse and a dummy being fed pain. There's also something about Ada putting the decision down in writing as well that makes the result feel more consensual between both parties. Even at this point, Emil still feels a tad cautious, wondering if waking up was the only thing Ada wanted for him, but feeling more affinity towards her more than before. Now, I briefly want to discuss this bit of dialogue right here, which may emphasize just how easily it is to paint Ada as being a crazy researcher twisting her growing obsession and finding the perfect test subject into love for Emil, but I find her growing feelings for Emil as genuine in her love and care. While it may not be emphasized as much in her story, Ada is a woman in a male-dominated field. Perhaps the only reason she was able to work as a psychologist is because her father was already a prominent one. Even then, her research into hypnotherapy was looked down on. Say what you will about hypnotism, but at the time, Ada truly believed in the help and healing it could provide. Plus, it was a bunch of men turning her down and telling her she was wrong. Men who Ada believed were only interested in chasing the trends of research and not something new that could actually benefit the field. You've seen similar stories in IDV when it comes to Melly and Wendy, especially on how women are treated in the STEM field. A not often talked about one is Keegan's story, who isn't in the STEM field, but still wants to become a judge and attend law school. Yet it was her brothers who went on to do so, while her parents urged Keegan to take on the traditional role of a woman, which she refused to do so. Anyways, you get the picture here. But also, fun fact, Keegan is actually Ada's sister-in-law, because Ada has a sister named Betsy who married one of Keegan's brothers. Go figure. But all of this is to say Ada's reaction to Emil isn't an exaggeration. Ada has never been properly appreciated in her field of study by her colleagues, nor by the patients she treats until Emil came along. Having someone finally appreciate the work you do after years of research and trying to help others, well, if you think that wouldn't move you even in the slightest, I don't know what to say. Here Ada says, at least that's what they called me back then in her introduction. I actually believe this is part of the reason Ada's title is in quotes as psychologist, because despite actually being a doctor and a professional in the field of psychology, once she turned to hypnotherapy, Ada became less legitimate as a medical professional in the eyes of many of her peers. I could be wrong about that speculation though. But anyways, after all of this, Ada would return to Emil with a flower, realizing she was developing feelings for him. In response, a confused Emil would ponder what to do with it, and how he should return the favor, as we saw before in one of his quotes. In the end, he chose to make a ring for her out of the wires from beneath his bed. Poor man was even fretting over how to approach her with the ring, as he was worried he would scare her due to the fact she had seen his psychotic episodes before. Thankfully, Ada accepted it, and while Emil was wondering if she even liked it, Ada was beyond words. I can't even describe how I felt just now, is what she said. See, for Ada, this is her first. As mentioned before, this is the first time a patient has expressed any sort of compassion, gratitude, and understanding in her work, and that feeling continued to blossom into love. She decided then and there that she would escape with Emil for choosing her over medication, for choosing suffering over sedation. The ring was a symbol of their pact together, a chain that binded them to each other. Ada herself would make a ring to give to Emil so that they'd match. The ring is a very important symbol of Ada and Emil's bond with each other, so I don't blame many of the Ada Emil fans who fretted over Emil's ring being missing as a hunter when ⴅSOIR was first announced. Well, fret no longer. It turns out the ring was staring at us right in the face this whole time. See, this is regular Emil, but his appearance is already reminiscent of ⴅSOIR. You can see under his chin the restraint on his neck holds the ring. Even in both forms of ⴅSOIR's, his human form and his beast form, you can still see the ring is attached to the restraint around his neck. The ring is apparently still symbolic in meaning, though slightly different from the original intention of it being a symbol of Ada and Emil's vow to each other, as it says here. The ring that previously served as a symbol of their bond has been stripped of its past tender connotations of a promise on the fingertips. In this current design context, it acts more as Emil's sole human coordinate and mental anchor while on the verge of losing control. Now, I'm still a little bit confused exactly on what they mean by that, but I think it's more or less stating the ring is like the last vestiges of his humanity, a reminder that the beast before you still has the last shreds of his humanity, and the emotions that came with it encased in that simple ring, but can all come crumbling down in an instant because unfortunately, at this stage, Emil is too ready to, quote-unquote, plunge into the abyss of losing his humanity. So in this next section, I will explain my thoughts on their relationship, and I do apologize because I do feel like it was quite messy here and there up until now. I feel like I hopped around a lot with my analysis and thoughts, but that was basically the bulk of the story side of the event. Now, in the end, Orpheus appears to be at a bit of a loss in how to describe their relationship. On one hand, it doesn't seem to be a simple doctor and patient relationship, or even a relationship of lovers. He notes that Ada and Emil are difficult to classify through common sense alone, and it is that point I want to stress. I feel as if viewing Ada and Emil's relationship through our more modern concept of what we think a relationship should entail between two people is a mistake, often made in the community. It is also a mistake to look at their relationship as if they're under normal circumstances. That part, no. I would say this whole thing that I'm saying right now seems pretty obvious, but it's natural to fall into that line of thinking at times without realizing it. But truly, their relationship is by no means normal. Nothing about Ada or Emil is normal. It's a disservice to both of them if you put them into a box of this is how a relationship between two loving people should look like. Are they just lovers? Are they soulmates? We can slap label after label on them and nothing would feel like a 100% match because there are too many layers here to peel back. I myself sort of viewed Ada negatively in a way when I realized that after reading through her lore a bit, it truly did feel as if she was trying to rewrite Emil into being the perfect experimental subject and lover for her, regardless of what memories he had that could restore the person he once was. I just didn't like the idea of erasing someone's past like that, as despite the awful memories, it makes a person who they are today. However, the more I thought about it, and the more lore I read, the more I realized that Emil never really got a chance to even really figure out an identity of his own, nor was he even allowed to live a proper life at all before Ada. He was spending his formative years being raised in a dysfunctional family, already exposed to madness at a very young age, and then spent the rest of the time being raised as a dog. Emil simply has no good memories at all until Ada, so it's understandable Ada sought to erase them because not once did Emil ever appear to reminisce on any good or sweet memories. Ironically, the only good memory he had of his past that he recalled was Ada giving him bread out on the streets when they were both younger. And guess what? That one good memory still involved Ada. By the way, at the time, Ada went back to her father to seek help for Emil, but her father refused, leaving Ada upset and confused. Unfortunately, she wouldn't meet Emil until years later at White Sand Street Asylum. I wonder, though, how things would have been different if Ada's father would have stepped up to help. Also, I apologize as I don't remember where I got these screenshots. I tried looking, but I think I saw that from an art book, perhaps? I saw this on Twitter and nabbed them ages ago, so if anyone knows where they're from, please let me know. I would have loved to credit this. But anyways, in between meeting her out on the streets and meeting her at the asylum, Emil lived more worse than the dogs he had to fight. Hence why his hunter name is ⴅSOIR, meaning heart animal in German, so I have no idea if I'm saying that right. I apologize. Because as terrible as it is to say at Emil's core, the place where he should have held innate humanistic qualities and traits instead houses that of a beast. He was raised like one, then truly at the heart of it all is a wild dog who wanted to live like a human, and only got that chance with Ada, but for such a short time. While Ada certainly does have her faults, initially treated Emil no better than those around him, specifically with the electroshock therapy experiment, she was quick to change and switch how she wanted to treat him. I mean, she fell for him fast. She was the first one to fall in love in the couple. Not even 2 weeks, and she was absconding with him from Bright Sand after sharing some flowers and exchanging rings that were made out of bed rings. Like, dare I say that if Ada never met Emil, both as a young girl giving the poor boy some bread, and at the asylum, Emil's life would have been worse for it. In the 3 years they were able to live quietly together, when Emil showed great development and mental stability, he was most likely at his happiest. While there was some pain after their escape, it appears as if Ada never went beyond hypnotherapy to treat him, which is a relatively painless procedure. Mentally, it can be a different story though. You really can't look at Ada in black and white lighting. She's a gray character splashed with a myriad of gray tones. I honestly feel as if Ada suffers from the unfair scrutiny and scathing opinions that a lot of morally gray women in media just in general face. And it's usually the women who bear the brunt of this, not men. In addition, thanks to the 10-day memories event, we know Emil is perfectly his own person, and not as blank of a slate as one would think. But he isn't always capable of understanding everything going on around him, or even capable of making decisions at times. I find he's quite insightful and cognizant in his own right. Similar to Orpheus, I find it difficult to label them as well. It's so easy to call them lovers and soulmates, but it also feels like it's lacking a certain oomph that would properly define them and capture the essence of their relationship. But perhaps I'm just overcomplicating it. But the definitions of lovers in a romantic relationship feels like it needs some redefining when talking about Ada and Emil. Perhaps I'm also being self-indulgent when saying all of this, but truly it does seem like defining human relationships can be terribly difficult, especially in a game like Identity V, where individual characters can have so much going on with them that connecting them to other characters unlocks a whole smorgasbord of intricacies and subtle details that would drive you mad. Now this is from the official design notes. I had to look up what the Florence Nightingale effect is, as I had never heard of it. But apparently, in short, is when a caregiver falls in love with their patient. Granted, the developers themselves state that they want Ada and Emil's kind of love to not be even that, but something beyond that. But what exactly? I think that's up to the individual to decide. And honestly, I like that. That's one of the main things that keep me stuck in the abyss of this game despite the current circumstances. The lore feels well thought out, even though it does sometimes stumble. But for a live service game, that's to be expected. It's honestly amazing to me how it's nearly been 10 years, and the lore in this game feels as fresh and engaging as ever, and it's still building and building and building, and I feel like not a lot of people appreciate that. You can interpret parts of the lore and its characters in so many ways, and that's okay. This is why it almost always feels silly to argue over how to view the lore, especially characters who have so many nuances and little things it would make you cry from frustration if you tried to understand it all. They also will just keep adding and adding more as the years go by, so honestly, it's good to just learn to chill when it comes to the lore. But this reminds me of another reason why I'm also looking forward to Hertz tier. He will also get a concept design video if the previous identity switches are anything to go by, so I can't wait to learn more about Emil and by extension Ada when that time comes. So in conclusion, let's revisit the questions I asked earlier. 1. Is Ada a terrible person? 2. Is Emil suitable to be a hunter? Should he have received an identity switch? I believe I directly answered the first question, but the second question wasn't really directly answered, though I'm sure by now you have an answer. I'm really interested in how they will represent Emil as a hunter as time goes on, since I know some are disappointed not seeing Helena or Galatea receive their identity switches this time around. I personally like the little surprise, and fortunately believe it fits completely that Emil gets his switch with the game's Zero story. He reminds me of Melly a bit actually. They're opposite in their identity switches, where Melly yearned to become one of the little creatures she studied, or rather she felt the need to in order to survive and pursue her passion. If that meant spreading her rings, she'd gladly take it because she loves entomology. On the other hand, Emil became the very thing he fears, and became the very creature at the root of his nightmares and pain. Emil wanted the exact opposite. and desperately wanted to become normal, to live as a normal person with his beloved Ada. They both were pushed to the brink of their humanity, or really beyond it in Emil's case, as it turned out way worse than either he or Ada would realize. I guess we just have to wait and see when Divergence drops later in the year to see how their story really ends. For now, I thank you all for bearing with me on this lengthy lore analysis. I want to reiterate again, these are only my personal thoughts and deductions. Ada and Emil have a lot going on, and while I did want to delve into essence stories and other events, etc., all of that deserves a whole other video too. Personally, I look forward to the story of Game Zero, despite knowing full well my feelings are going to be ripped to shreds, as if they aren't already. Thanks for watching.